Uh-oh. Today we're going to hear about a prominent figure in the promotion of black inferiority and racial hierarchies. Now, this gentleman here referred to his field of study as the inward business or inwardology, as we'll see later in this commentary. And some of his pseudoscientific work was very influential during his day, as he was viewed as an authority in science by his peers. So we're going to take a look at some of the written records he left during his career in the middle of the 1800s. And so for us to do that, we're going to open up the book here. It's called The Black Image in the White Mind by Dr. George M. Fredrickson. And so let's turn to page 78, where he writes this. The most fervent of the scientific apologists for the American system of racial subordination was Dr. Josiah C. Nott. That's the guy right there we have our eyes on in this commentary, Dr. Josiah Nott, who was a fervent apologist or defender of the American system of racial subordination, or keeping those they named Negroes down in the pit. Let's keep reading. Who became the leading exponent of the new ethnology after the death of Morton. Dr. Samuel Morton was a person we heard about in the previous commentary who measured a variety of human skulls, and his findings were interpreted by others to prove that the blacks were permanently inferior to the whites. Now, after his death, Dr. Josiah Nott reigned in his stead as the leading exponent of the new ethnology, which is a branch of study that deals with comparing cultural differences and similarities across societies, right? But ethnology, as practiced by many of the people back in the 1800s, was different than how it is practiced today. Back then, they used it as a tool to justify racial hierarchies and to get high off of white supremacy instead of genuinely trying to understand the differences and similarities between cultures. But let's keep going. Preconceived racial attitudes probably drew him to ethnology in the first place and influenced his inquiries. In 1845, Nott wrote to James Henry Hammond, a vigorously pro-slavery South Carolina planter and political leader, that his work was designed to confound the abolitionists.
Abolition,
he wrote,
is one of those unfortunate questions which presents one face to the philosopher and another to the mass. Reason or religion can never decide it. The results of emancipation,
meaning emancipation of the blacks, is a complex issue which is viewed from one angle by the philosopher, which is more of an abstract and theoretical angle, and from another by the masses of people, which is more of a practical and of immediate concern. And he states that reasoning nor religion are reliable enough in themselves to decide the matter of emancipation. Let's keep going.
I hope that the grounds I have taken may do something after a while.
He's referring to his supposed scientific theories that he has put forth to support racial hierarchies and pro-slavery ideologies. And he's hoping that the grounds he has taken will contribute to the defense of slavery and the subordination of blacks. Let's keep going. In another letter to Hammond in the same year, he confessed that his interests were not so much in races in general as in the Negro in particular, and implied that some of his evidence for plural origins was designed to attract attention and add support to an a priori assumption of innate Negro inferiority. A priori, which is to say that it was assumed to be true before any evidence was presented. So Dr. Fredrickson states that Nott already had an a priori assumption that Negroes were naturally inferior, and he used some of his evidence to support that, right? And here's what Nott wrote.
The Negro question was the one I wished to bring out, and I embalmed it in Egyptian ethnography, etc., to excite a little more interest.
The Negro question he wished to bring out was around the treatment, role, and the status of blacks. Now, he admitted that he embalmed it or disguised it in Egyptian ethnography, which goes back to what we discussed in Commentary 230, how Morton's findings suggested that blacks were relegated to the same servile position in ancient Egypt. And this here was a slick way for Nott to demonstrate how blacks have always been inferior to other people, right? Supposedly. And so he used the Egyptian culture to incite interest because Egypt was highly admired by many prominent people in America at that time. So he understood that this would be a strategic way to cultivate his a priori ideologies of Negro inferiority in the mind of many. Now let's keep going. His intent, obviously dictated by Southern obsessions, was
to follow out the Negro, moral and physical, in all his ramifications.
meaning he planned to study any and everything about the people they called Negroes, from their morality to their physical makeup and everything in between, to find support for his preconceived ideas of permanent black inferiority. Now watch this. He liked to describe his field of study as
The business, or rology.
the inward business, or inwardology, which is the study of the inward, the Negro, or the black person, right? They all meant the same thing. And this is what he named his field of study, which, like he said, he was on a mission to study every detail about them, right? He wasn't hiding this at all. Now let's keep going. In 1850, Nott presented his views to the Southern Rights Association in Mobile by an anti-abolition lecture on the natural history of mankind, viewed in connection with Negro slavery. In this address and in many other pronouncements, he openly attempted to put himself and his views at the forefront of the pro-slavery defense. But Nott's concept of what ethnology had revealed was not limited to its justification of Negro servitude. The full sweep of his racism and how he hoped to see it implemented came out in one of the sections he wrote in Types of Mankind. Pay attention. He described the Caucasians as having,
in all ages, been the rulers.
Their destiny, therefore, is
to conquer and hold every foot of the globe, where climate does not interpose an impenetrable barrier. No philanthropy, no legislation, no missionary labors can change this law. It is written in man's nature by the hand of his creator. Right? He said that it was God ordained for Caucasians to conquer the entire globe. Now, is this what they did? It's just about what happened, right? They went around conquering much of the world. And it's these types of beliefs that fuel these events of conquest. And that's why you have to understand the importance of belief and how beliefs function as causes to create effects, right? No matter if they're objectively true or not. And so when you get a whole bunch of people who believe this, and on top of that, they have the financial and the technological power to make this an objective reality, that's how you get the results of world white dominance, right? It's not like they just went around terrorizing the world for no reason, right? They had super strong beliefs and desires behind the terror that they brought to the world, right? Just like any other humans who have terrorized or done good in society, right? And it's people like Dr. Josiah Nott who planted seed thoughts which encouraged whites to terrorize the globe, right? Because according to him, whites have always ruled in all ages, and global conquest was ordained by the creator, right? Now let's get some more. As for the inferior races, they would serve their purposes and become extinct. Their purpose would be to do the laborious work on the physical plane, while the whites do the thinking and strategizing in the realm of ideas. And so the whites were to be the head, and the supposed inferior races were to be the tail. And Nott predicted that once their purpose was fulfilled, then they would become extinct, right? Here we go. Here, as in other places in his writings, Nott was arguing less from the supposed facts of craniology or Egyptology than from a dogmatic white racialist view of history, of the kind then coming into fashion all over the Western world as a justification not only for slavery, but also for imperial expansion. In 1856, he helped edit a selective American edition of Gobineau's Essai sur l'inégalité des races humaines, a work that was short on biology and long on dogmatic assertions about the historical role of the races. Nott's writings, therefore, would seem to belong at least as much to the history of pro-slavery and racist propaganda as to the history of science. The fact that Nott was recognized as a leading scientist was perhaps more indicative of the racial preconceptions of his audience than of the quality of his research and theoretical formulations. Most damaging to Nott's image as an embattled apostle of science are the indications that he was somewhat less attached to polygenesis as a scientific hypothesis than to the practical fact of inherent Negro inferiority, however it might be explained. In reviewing a book by a monogenesis critic, Nott noted triumphantly that his opponent, by describing the Negroes as a permanent and inferior variety of the human species, had admitted The practical fact for which we have been contending.
Nigg caught one of his opponents slipping by admitting that the Negroes were supposedly permanently inferior. And Nigg is basically saying, thank you. This is what we've been trying to say the whole time, right? But here we go. In his introduction to Types of Mankind, he made clear again the essential point he was trying to make.
Whether an original diversity of races be admitted or not, the permanence of existing physical types will not be questioned by any archaeologist or naturalist of the present day, nor can the consequent permanence of moral and intellectual peculiarities of type be denied.
After the Civil War, in a pamphlet written in the hope of influencing the racial policy of the victorious North, Nigg reiterated all his practical facts in support of Negro inferiority, and then calmly acknowledged that the new Darwinian doctrine of human evolution over a vast span of time had cast doubt on his own theory of separate creation. Now remember that Nigg was a polygenicist who believed in separate origins for humanity. The Darwinian theory argued that humans, along with all other species, shared a common origin, which evolved over time through a process of natural selection. And so the adaptation in genetics were caused over time by environmental pressures, which caused physical changes in the organisms. So the argument and the evidence for it must have been compelling enough for Nigg to reconsider his position. Now let's continue. But even this school of thought
requires millions of years for their theory and would not controvert the facts and deductions I have laid down.
He's saying that even if Darwin is correct about a single origin, it doesn't change the fact one bit that those named as blacks are inferior, right? It didn't matter if it was a multiple origin or a single origin, right? The fact remained, according to Nigg, that the Negro was still inferior and the white was superior. Now let's finish up. This apparent receptivity to new scientific theories might have represented, as William Stanton suggests, Nigg's unselfish devotion to the progress of scientific truth, but it seems more likely, given its context, that it simply reflected what had been Nigg's major concern all along, the practical fact of permanent white superiority. From this standpoint, it did not matter a great deal whether one contended that Negroes had been created inferior a few thousand years ago or had become inferior through a glacially slow process of evolution. In either case, they were inferior and would remain so in any future that needed to be contemplated by living men. And that's how he felt about it. And there's others who read this material and other material from this time period, and they feel the same way, right? Guarantee. They know that a lot of them have simply accepted their colonial position at the bottom, and they have minimal intentions of doing anything about it, right? And so when they read this type of material, they conclude that their forefathers must have known something that today's society is purposely ignoring, right? Now, most people aren't going to come out and say this publicly, but I have seen it posted and hinted at in multiple places, right? So it's out there for sure. Now, I'm only speaking to people who actually want to do something, right? And who desire to decolonize the mind and climb out of the pit. Those are the only people that I'm concerned about and that I'm focused on, right? Everyone else, they can continue doing whatever it is that they've been doing. And if that works for them, then all power to them, right? But there are drastic changes that need to occur in consciousness, character, culture, and community to change the trajectory for those living today and for those of the future generations to come, right? And there be but few who are willing to make the necessary sacrifices, right? But there are those who are willing to, and that's who I'm talking to, right? And so with that being said, hopefully you have enjoyed this commentary and have learned something from it. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.